Go on. Show me what kind of monster you are. Marcus Thorne's voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth, like the granite peaks that sliced into the Colorado sky outside his colossal mountain estate. The words hung in the air of the cavernous breakfast room, sharper than the winter chill. On the polished obsidian table, flanked by untouched plates of fruit and pastries, lay 2 pieces of black titanium. Not credit cards, weapons, invitations to chaos. What would you do if you were handed a key to the world, with no rules, no limits, no consequences? Let me know in the comments right now, because what you're about to see will change the way you think about money, power, and the darkness that hides inside the human heart. And before we dive in, do me a favor. Smash that like button and subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of this. Across the table, Isabella Vance, 32, a woman carved from ambition and designer silk, let a slow, predatory smile crawl across her perfectly painted lips. Her fingers, tipped with blood-red nails, slid forward with the languid grace of a panther reaching for its kill. She plucked one of the cards from the table, its weight feeling familiar, comfortable in her palm. "Well, Marcus," she purred, her voice a low thrum of amusement and something far more primal. "This is a fascinating new game." She slid the card into a wallet that cost more than most people's rent, the snap of the clasp echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. Next to her, Sophia Rossi sat perfectly still. At 28, she was the estate's housekeeper, a ghost in a simple gray uniform, a woman whose entire existence was built on being invisible. Her skin was the color of warm terracotta, a stark contrast to the sterile opulence of Blackwood Manor. Her hands, chapped and calloused from years of silent labor, were clenched so tightly in her lap her knuckles had turned white. She stared at the second black card as if it were a coiled viper, ready to strike. The air in her lungs felt thick, stolen. "Sir, I can't," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor. The words were a betrayal to her own survival instincts, which screamed at her to stay silent, to obey, to remain unseen. Marcus Thorne's pale, ice-blue eyes, the eyes of a man who had built and destroyed empires before breakfast, narrowed not with anger, but with a cold, dissecting curiosity. He was a predator who had just seen his prey do something unexpected. "Why not, Sophia?" he pressed, leaning forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table. I'm just your housekeeper, sir," she stammered, her gaze dropping to the floor, unable to meet his. She could feel Isabella's amused stare burning into the side of her face. I don't need anything." "Oh, this isn't about need," Marcus said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a scientist about to introduce a new variable into a cruel experiment. This is about want. It's about the raw, naked truth of what a soul chooses when the cage is unlocked. You have 72 hours. No restrictions, no questions, no limits. But every single swipe, every transaction, will be a word in a story you tell me about who you really are. Sophia shook her head, a small, desperate motion. "But what if I do it wrong? What if I choose the wrong thing?" "There is no wrong," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, an intimate threat. "There is only truth." When she still hesitated, his voice hardened, the edge of it sharp enough to draw blood. "Or perhaps you'd rather spend the rest of your life on your knees, polishing the floors that others walk on to write the rules of your world?" The words struck Sophia like a physical blow. She flinched, not from the cruelty, but from the brutal, unvarnished truth. Her chest tightened with a familiar, suffocating pressure, the fear that had been her constant companion her entire life. It was the fear of a working-class woman of color in a world that saw her as a tool, not a person. Fear of stepping out of line, of being misunderstood, of being punished for a crime she didn't even know she was committing. Her fingers, trembling, finally closed around the cold, heavy titanium. It felt less like a gift and more like a sentence. That very afternoon, Isabella Vance was a whirlwind of calculated excess on Worth Avenue in Palm Beach. Her phone was in one hand, the black card in the other, held not like a tool for payment, but like a scepter. She glided into Chanel and emerged with a handbag that cost $5,200. Next, a silk trench coat from Burberry, a cool $4,000. Then came the jewelry, a Cartier bracelet, a Rolex watch, diamonds that glittered like frozen tears. In the hushed, reverent silence of each boutique, she took flawless selfies in the mirrors, her expression a perfect blend of triumph and casual power. She didn't post them. Not yet. They were ammunition, stored for a future battle, proof of her proximity to power. Meanwhile, miles away, in a grittier, forgotten part of the city, Sophia Rossi walked into a small, greasy spoon diner, not to buy a meal, but to find a quiet corner to breathe. Her palms were slick with sweat. The card in her worn purse felt heavier than a block of lead, a burden of impossible choice. She thought of giving it back. She thought of calling her mother, whose tired voice would only fill with worry. She thought of running, of just disappearing. But then, Marcus Thorne's words echoed in her mind, polishing the floors while others write the rules. Something inside her, a small, flickering ember of defiance she thought had died years ago, flared. She pulled out her phone, her fingers clumsy on the screen. She didn't search for designer brands. She searched for pain. Local orphanages in need, homeless shelters, Miami-Dade area, housing initiatives for veterans. 2 hours later, Sophia stood outside a crumbling brick building with faded paint and boarded-up windows. A hand-painted sign, peeling from the humidity, read, St. Jude's Haven. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of bleach and quiet desperation. The director, a weary Haitian woman named Mrs. Dubois, greeted her with a tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Hope, for her, was a dangerous currency. Sophia didn't give her name. She didn't explain the card. She just asked, her voice low but steady, "What do you need, right now? What do the children need most?" By the end of the day, a wire transfer for $20,000 had been made for critical roof repairs and a new stock of children's winter coats, all donated under the name Marcus Thorne. No photo op, no press release, just a transaction and a small handwritten note left on the counter. For the children. May your nights be warm and your dreams be safe. If this story is already touching your heart, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to the world. She did the same that evening for a small non-profit that provided micro-homes for homeless veterans on the outskirts of the city. Another $30,000, again, anonymous. The only name ever listed was the man who had given her the card. She was using his power, not claiming it for herself. Back at Blackwood Manor, in a study that looked more like the command center of a small nation, Marcus Thorne sat in a high-backed leather chair, watching a massive monitor. Every transaction pinged in real time. Every swipe told a story. Isabella Vance, Chanel, $5,200. Isabella Vance, Cartier, $11,800. Isabella Vance, private jet charter deposit, $25,000. He leaned back, a cynical, satisfied smirk on his face. Predictable. The hunger for status, for the symbols of power, was the most common human failing. It was boring. Then, the next set of notifications appeared. Marcus Thorne, St. Jude's Haven, $20,000. Marcus Thorne, Veteran Housing Initiative, $30,000. His brow furrowed. He hadn't authorized those. He hadn't even heard of those organizations. A quick trace confirmed the card used was the second one, the one he'd given to the housekeeper. The ghost. He sat forward slowly, his hands steepling under his chin. Not a single dollar spent on herself. No new shoes, no fancy dinner, no social media posturing. Not even a receipt with her own name on it. She had erased herself from the act of giving. She could have taken the credit, could have framed herself as a secret philanthropist. She chose invisibility. That night, Sophia returned to her small, sparse room above the garage. She didn't turn on the light. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and stared at the card, then at the single framed photo on her nightstand. A picture of her and her mother, smiling from a time before life had worn them down. Her eyes welled with tears, not of guilt, but of a profound, earth-shattering relief. She hadn't failed the test. She had simply answered it. Across the estate, in the main house, Marcus Thorne sat by the massive stone fireplace for the first time in years. His late wife Lorraine's favorite rocking chair sat by the window, covered in a thin layer of dust, untouched since her death 3 years ago. He stood, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled down her worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. He ran his thumb over the faded cover and whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of his wife. She had a key to the entire world, and she spent it on strangers, in my name. Who the hell even does that anymore? And for the first time since the cold, sterile silence had descended upon his life, Marcus Thorne felt something stir deep beneath the layers of ice and cynicism. It wasn't just respect. It was something dangerously close to awe. Isabella Vance stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror in a private dressing suite at one of Bal Harbor's most exclusive boutiques, a place so elite it didn't even have a sign. A flute of chilled champagne dangled from her fingers while a nervous stylist clipped the back of a shimmering, midnight blue gown snugly against her waist. "I have to say," Isabella mused, examining her reflection with the critical eye of a surgeon, "power has a color, doesn't it? And it's always black." The stylist offered a polite, practiced chuckle. Isabella wasn't looking for a response, just an echo of her own conviction. Her phone buzzed with a new notification from her banking app, and she glanced down. Gucci, $2,850. Louis Vuitton, $4,100. A down payment on a luxury condo pre-sale, South Beach, $50,000. She smirked. Every swipe was a declaration, not just of taste, but of position. The world, she believed with religious fervor, didn't reward humility. It rewarded presence, and Isabella Vance was making damn sure she had arrived. Meanwhile, across the state and a world away in the quiet, working-class outskirts of Miami, Sophia Rossi knelt in front of a battered community bulletin board outside a local library, pinning up a flyer she'd printed herself. It read, "Free medical supplies and warm coats for families in need. This Saturday, courtesy of a generous anonymous donor." The shelter director, a wiry man with kind eyes and hands rough from a lifetime of hard work, approached her. "You sure you don't want your name on this somewhere?" he asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. "People should know who did this." Sophia shook her head, her breath visible in the cool morning air. "No. The credit belongs to someone else." He smiled at her, still puzzled. "Well, whoever it is, they've got a heart that doesn't show up too often around here." Sophia gave him a quiet, fleeting smile. As she stepped away, she glanced at her phone. There were no congratulatory messages, no likes, no notifications of a world applauding her. And yet, she felt a quiet, steady warmth spreading through her chest, a feeling she hadn't known in years. It was the feeling of purpose, Back inside the cold marble fortress of Blackwood Manor, Marcus sat at his desk once more, sipping black coffee as the transactions continued to flood his monitor in two starkly different streams. Isabella Vance, private spa treatment, $3,500. Isabella Vance, exclusive handbag pre-order, $7,000. Marcus Thorne, Community Medical Center of Liberty City, $2,500. Marcus Thorne, Food Bank of South Florida, $40,000. He stared at the names, his mind a whirlwind. Only one card carried Sophia's fingerprints, and yet she refused to attach her name to a single act of kindness. He opened a leather-bound notebook, the same one he used for billion-dollar investment decisions. At the top of a fresh page, he wrote a single stark line. "The quiet ones leave the deepest mark." He paused, a memory surfacing, sharp and painful. A conversation he'd once had with Lorraine. They were at a charity gala, and he had been complaining about a volunteer who refused to come on stage for an award. "She's too soft," he had said, dismissing her. "She lacks the killer instinct to make a real difference." Lorraine had turned to him, her eyes full of a disappointment that stung more than any anger. "No, Marcus," she had replied, her voice soft but firm. "She's just not loud about being good. That doesn't mean she isn't." Marcus ran a hand through his silvering hair. Sophia hadn't touched luxury. She had touched lives. That simple, undeniable fact unsettled him to his core. He had constructed this test expecting to confirm his darkest suspicions about human nature. He had expected mediocrity, entitlement, maybe even outright greed. He had not expected this quiet, radical act of selflessness. It was Isabella's behavior that made perfect, logical sense in his world. And yet, it was Sophia's inexplicable restraint that haunted him. That evening, Isabella returned to the estate, her arms laden with designer shopping bags, her hair freshly styled into a sleek, severe bob that screamed high society. She breezed through the grand foyer, passing Sophia, who was polishing the base of a marble statue. Isabella didn't offer so much as a glance. "Long day?" Sophia asked gently, her voice soft. Isabella didn't slow her pace. "Some of us actually know how to seize an opportunity, sweetheart." The word sweetheart was delivered with the precision of a stiletto. Sophia stood still, the scent of lemon polish on her hands. Her hands were chapped from handing out flyers in the biting wind. Her simple uniform still smelled faintly of old wood and library dust. She looked down at her own shoes, the same sturdy, sensible pair she'd worn for 3 years. She felt a pang, not of envy, but of a profound and sudden weariness. Later that night, Marcus summoned both women for dinner. The request was formal, delivered by the head butler, and highly unusual. They gathered in the grand dining room, a space so ornate it felt like a museum, heavy with gold leaf and dark wood carvings. Lorraine used to host chamber music concerts here, Marcus remembered, filling the oppressive silence with life. Isabella arrived dressed in a velvet gown, her makeup flawless, an aura of victory practically radiating from her shoulders. She looked like she belonged there. Sophia entered quietly, wearing her best blouse, a simple pale blue garment, a little faded at the collar. She looked out of place. She knew it. She felt it in her bones. Marcus sat at the head of the immense table, a glass of untouched scotch before him. "You've both had 48 hours, he said, his voice calm but surgically precise. "And already the paths you've chosen couldn't be more different." Isabella tilted her head, a confident smirk playing on her lips. "I assume this wasn't a test of who could spend more, Marcus." "It's not," he replied, his gaze unblinking. "But it is about what your spending reveals." Sophia looked down, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't want praise, and she certainly didn't want shame. She just wanted to disappear into the wallpaper, as she always did. But Marcus wasn't letting that happen tonight. I received an email this afternoon, he continued, his eyes locking onto Isabella. It was from a shelter director in Liberty City. He thanked me for a donation I never made. Isabella's smile tightened at the edges, but she held his gaze. She knew where this was going. Marcus then turned his full attention to Sophia. It felt like being pinned by a searchlight. He said a woman came by quietly, wouldn't leave her name, but insisted the donation be credited to me. Sophia opened her mouth, but no words came out. She felt a hot flush creep up her neck. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping. Why? She finally met his eyes. It felt like standing on the edge of a skyscraper. Because it was your money, she said, her voice quiet but clear. You gave me the card. It didn't feel right to take credit for someone else's kindness. A heavy silence stretched across the vast room. Isabella rolled her eyes with theatrical boredom. Oh, please. So we're rewarding feigned modesty now? It's a transparent play for sympathy. Marcus ignored her completely. He was still watching Sophia, but his expression had changed. He wasn't looking at her as an employer anymore. He was looking at her as a man who had seen the absolute worst in people and had just been confronted with something rare, something he thought had gone extinct. He turned to Isabella next. And you, Isabella? What did you learn about yourself in these 2 days? Isabella's smile returned, sharp and defiant this time. That I know how to live. That I don't apologize for my ambition. If this was a test, I didn't fail it. I just wasn't sentimental about it. Marcus nodded slowly. Noted. Dinner ended in a tense, suffocating quiet. Isabella left first, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the marble floor. Sophia lingered, gathering her courage. You're not angry with me, sir? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. No, Sophia, Marcus said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. But I am surprised. And that doesn't happen often. She gave a small nod and turned to go. As she reached the enormous double doors, Marcus called out gently. Sophia. She turned back. He hesitated, the word seeming to catch in his throat. Then he said, Thank you for choosing to give when no one was watching. Sophia left the room with her eyes glassy and her heart pounding, not from fear this time, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Dignity. And perhaps for the first time since setting foot in this cold, magnificent mansion, she believed she might belong to something more than just the shadows. What do you guys think? Was Sophia's move brilliant or naive? And was Isabella just being honest about how the world works? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm dying to know what you think. And stick around, because this experiment is far from over. The next morning, the estate felt heavier, as if the marble halls and vaulted ceilings were carrying a secret too large to ignore. Sophia moved through the main corridor, a laundry basket balanced on her hip, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs. She kept her head down, a habit ingrained by years of service. Years of being invisible had taught her that silence was the safest armor. As she passed Marcus's main office, she heard a voice, Isabella's, sharp and dismissive. Let's not pretend she's a saint, Robert, Isabella said. Sophia paused, her body hidden by a large marble pillar. The office door was cracked open just enough. I mean, really? She gets handed a black card and suddenly she's the poster child for virtue. It's pathetic. Another voice, male and obsequious, likely one of the junior estate managers, chimed in. I don't know, Isabella. Mr. Thorne seemed quite impressed. Isabella scoffed, the sound dripping with contempt. Men like Marcus are easy to impress when they see contrived humility. It makes them feel powerful, like they've discovered some rare, untamed creature. She didn't do it out of kindness. She did it to manipulate him. She's playing the long game, and you'll all see it when it's too late. Sophia's hands tightened around the plastic handles of the basket until they dug into her palms. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from a deep, aching pain. It wasn't just what was said, but how easily it echoed the whispers she'd heard her entire life. She's trying to be something she's not. She's got an angle. She forced her legs to move, to keep walking. She didn't want a confrontation, but inside her, something that had been soft for too long began to harden. Later that day, Marcus sat in his study, reviewing the final day's transactions. The 72 hours were almost up. Isabella Vance, custom jewelry order, $16,500. Isabella Vance, designer sunglasses, $1,250. Isabella Vance, contribution to Political Action Committee, $10,000. He noted the last one with a grim nod. Even her charity was transactional, a chess move to gain influence. Then came Sophia's final round. Marcus Thorne, Youth Literacy Fund, Miami Public Schools, $10,000. Marcus Thorne, Women's Shelter of Broward County, 27,000, $200. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. She was still doing it, still giving, still naming him as the benefactor. He picked up the phone and dialed his private investigator, a man he kept on retainer for situations far more nefarious than this. The Broward County donation, Marcus said without preamble. Confirm it came from the second card. There was a pause. Yes, sir, it did. We have a confirmation. She was seen there this morning. Delivered the funds electronically, stayed for 2 hours helping their staff sort through clothing donations, then left without saying a word to anyone but the director. Marcus let out a slow, heavy breath. Any photos? Media? None, sir. The shelter staff said she explicitly refused any recognition. He hung up. Downstairs, Isabella was preparing for a different kind of performance. She had invited a local business journalist to the estate for a casual conversation about modern women in high-powered spaces. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit with gold accents and a watch worth more than Sophia's car. The journalist, a sharp young woman named Jordan, arrived precisely on time. Marcus happened to pass through the main hall as they were setting up in the sun-drenched atrium. Isabella, he said, his voice cool and flat. What is this? She flashed a brilliant, practiced smile. Just a small interview, Marcus, a lifestyle piece. I thought it might be good for the estate's public image. I didn't approve any media access to my home, he replied, his expression unreadable. Isabella's smile faltered for only a fraction of a second. It's not about the estate, it's about me, the woman who works beside one of the most influential men in America. They want to know what it's like to manage your schedule, to advise on your meetings. I didn't ask you to speak on my behalf. I'm not, she said smoothly, her confidence returning. I'm speaking for myself. Just then, Marcus's eyes moved past her, toward the grand entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see Sophia walking up the long driveway, carrying 2 large paper bags filled with groceries for the staff kitchen. She wore no makeup. Her shoes were worn. The wind pulled at her dark curls, but she walked with a steady, unhurried purpose. He looked back at Isabella, at her flawless suit, her expensive watch, her carefully constructed narrative. End the interview, he said. Now. Isabella stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief. Are you serious? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet command was more chilling than any shout. Yes. Isabella's eyes burned with a cold fire as she turned back to the journalist. So sorry, Jordan. It seems we'll have to reschedule. Jordan, flustered, quickly packed her equipment and left. Isabella stood alone in the atrium, her heels clicking like accusations on the marble floor as she walked away. Later that afternoon, Marcus called Sophia into the library. She entered hesitantly, wiping her hands on her apron, a habit she couldn't break. "Sir?" "Sit, Sophia," he said gently, gesturing to the plush leather chair across from his massive desk. She perched on the edge of it, her back ramrod straight, her eyes cautious. "I've been watching the way you've used the card," he began. "Or rather, the way you haven't used it on yourself." Sophia opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand. "I'm not here to lecture you or to praise you. I'm here to ask a simple question. Why keep putting my name on everything?" Sophia looked down at her hands, then slowly lifted her gaze. Her eyes were steady now. "Because people are more likely to accept help when it comes from someone they respect. A billionaire's name opens doors that a housekeeper's name can't." Marcus sat back, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "That's not something most people would admit so freely." "I didn't take the card for attention," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I took it because you told me to, and I wanted to do something that mattered." "And you never once thought of using it for yourself?" he pressed. "I thought about it," she admitted, the honesty of it raw and painful. "I could have paid off my mother's medical bills, bought a car that doesn't stall on cold mornings. But I've lived without those things my whole life. The people I helped, they're living without roofs, without warmth, without hope." He was silent for a long moment, the only sound in the room the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Then he said quietly, "You remind me of someone." "Your wife?" Sophia asked before she could stop herself. The words were out, audacious and unprofessional. Marcus looked up, surprised but not angry. Sophia flushed. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have—" "No," he interrupted gently. "It's all right. You're right." He reached for the small, silver-framed photograph on his desk. It showed a woman with a radiant smile, standing under a canopy of autumn leaves. "Lorraine. She used to say that real power isn't in what you hold, it's in what you give away." Sophia's eyes stung unexpectedly. She hadn't cried in years. Marcus stood up, his decision made. "Sophia, would you be willing to help me with something?" She stood too, confused. "What kind of something?" "Something my wife dreamed of building," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I didn't have the courage to start. Until now." Sophia nodded slowly, her heart pounding. "If it helps people, then yes." He offered his hand across the desk. She took it, her calloused fingers enclosed in his. She didn't know if this was still part of the test, or if it was the beginning of something far more important. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. But inside the library, something profound had shifted. The rigid line between power and purpose, between employer and employee, had blurred. And for the first time in a very long time, Marcus Thorne wasn't leading. He was learning. The following morning, the mountain air rolled in crisp and clear, and Marcus Thorne stood silently at the edge of the south garden, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. It was the first time in years he'd stepped into the garden this early. Lorraine used to walk here at sunrise, pruning roses and humming quietly to herself. Songs he never knew the names of, only the feelings they left behind. Behind him, the soft sound of footsteps approached. "It's colder than I expected," Sophia said, clutching a light jacket around her. Marcus offered a rare, genuine smile. "Colorado mornings aren't known for their mercy." She chuckled faintly. "I'll remember that." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the aspen trees rustle in the early breeze. "I've been thinking about what you said," Marcus began, his voice low. "About how some people won't accept help unless it comes from someone with a name." Sophia nodded, watching a robin settle into a frost-covered hedge. It's the way the world works. People listen when they see power. They trust money more than they trust intent. He turned to her, his gaze intense. That's why I want to build something. Something that isn't about me, but uses what I have to fulfill what Lorraine dreamed of. A place for women. The broken, the discarded, the invisible. Sophia blinked, stunned. You're serious? He nodded. It won't be easy, and it will need someone at its heart who understands people better than I do. She looked at him carefully, her mind racing. Why me? Marcus's eyes didn't waver. Because you see people, not just their problems. You see their dignity. You gave without demanding recognition. You made more of an impact in 72 hours than some of my foundation managers do in an entire fiscal year. Sophia's throat tightened. I've never run anything. I'm not qualified. Neither was Lorraine when she started her first shelter in Chicago with nothing but bake sale money and pure grit, he said. What mattered was that she showed up, every single day. The words hung in the air, filled with a sacred weight. I want you to lead the planning, Marcus said. Location, staff, budget, everything. I don't know if I can, she said, the old fears whispering at the edge of her mind. Try, he said simply. Fail even, but do it honestly. Sophia stood still, stunned not just by the offer, but by the profound trust that lay beneath it. Across the estate, Isabella watched them from her second-floor balcony, her hands curled so tightly around the iron railing that her knuckles were white. The expression on her face was one of cold, calculating fury. That afternoon, Sophia sat alone in the estate's old library, a room that had belonged to Lorraine. It was now unused and dusty, a memory tucked too far away. Marcus had handed her the key and said only, "Start where she left off." Inside were boxes filled with Lorraine's life's work, handwritten notes, journals, architectural designs for shelters, letters from women across the country whose lives she had touched, clippings of newspaper stories she had saved. One letter, tucked inside a worn journal, caught Sophia's eye. It was dated 12 years earlier, the ink faded by time. To whoever continues this work after me. You won't be applauded. You'll be dismissed, questioned, even undermined by those who feel threatened by your light. But do it anyway. Some fights are invisible, and those are the ones that change everything. Sophia exhaled slowly, her hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from reverence. She ran her fingers over the words, then gently folded the letter and placed it into a notebook of her own. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Isabella. Meet me in the East Lounge. Now. Sophia hesitated, then stood. The battle was beginning. Isabella was already seated when Sophia arrived, lounging on a velvet chaise. She wore black slacks and a cashmere sweater, her heels casually kicked off beside her. Her nails were painted the color of dried blood. She didn't look up as Sophia approached. You wanted to see me? Sophia asked. Isabella finally lifted her eyes, her gaze as sharp as shattered glass. You think you've won something, don't you? I don't understand. You walk around here like some kind of saint, Isabella sneered, getting to her feet. As if your manufactured generosity makes you superior. I'm just doing what I think is right, Isabella scoffed. You think Marcus's attention isn't temporary? You're a project to him, a momentary fascination with the noble poor. Do-gooders like you burn out, Sophia. Or worse, you get used up and thrown away. Sophia's jaw tightened. If he's using me to do good in the world, then I'm okay with that. Isabella stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You're in over your head. You don't belong in this world. I've been in worse places, Sophia said, her own voice quiet but unyielding, and I've survived all of them. The silence between them crackled. Isabella was inches from her now, radiating a cold fury. "You won't last," she hissed. Sophia didn't flinch. "Maybe not, but I'll leave something real behind when I go. Can you say the same?" Isabella's nostrils flared, but for once she seemed to have no response. Sophia turned and left the room without another word, leaving Isabella standing alone in the opulent silence. Later that night, Sophia returned to Lorraine's study. She opened a new journal and began to write. Plans, names of potential outreach workers, addresses of buildings for sale, ideas for long-term sustainability. It felt impossible, but it also felt necessary. From the doorway, Marcus watched her for a moment before stepping in. He held a single sealed envelope. He placed it gently on the table beside her. "I found this in Lorraine's safe," he said. "The inscription on the back says it's for the person who continues her legacy. I think that's you now." He turned to leave, but Sophia called out softly. "Mr. Thorne?" He looked back. "I won't let her down. Won't let—" His gaze lingered on her a moment longer. Then he nodded once and walked away. Sophia picked up the envelope, her heart pounding. She broke the seal and began to read. And in that quiet room, filled with ghosts and dreams, Sophia Rossi, a housekeeper with calloused hands and a heart she once thought too fragile, began to build something that would outlive them all. The following week unfolded like a balancing act on a razor's edge. Each morning, Sophia woke before dawn, her hands still performing the familiar, grounding chores. Scrubbing, folding, polishing. But after her duties were done, she walked not to the staff kitchen, but to Lorraine's study, where sunlight slanted across papers and plans and the fragile architecture of possibility. Marcus kept his distance, watching from afar with a cautious reverence. He offered resources, contacts, legal advice, financial models, but never pushed. Occasionally, he'd leave a fresh cup of coffee on the desk, or a file of non-profit statistics he thought she might find useful. And each time, his eyes would linger for just a moment on Sophia, as if seeing something entirely new in a person he'd thought he understood. Sophia was growing into a role that had no title yet, but it came with a crushing weight, unspoken expectations, and a constant simmering pressure, especially from Isabella. It began subtly, curt nods instead of greetings. Schedules changed at the last minute without notice. Estate staff, loyal to Isabella's long-standing authority, were suddenly too busy to help when Sophia asked for something. Laundry was picked up late. Deliveries were missed. One afternoon, Sophia returned to the study to find her carefully organized notes had been rearranged, a few key pages even missing. She said nothing. But then she started to overhear the whispers in the hallways. "He's just bored. It's a phase. He'll replace her next month. She doesn't have the education for this, or the look. I give it 2 weeks before she embarrasses herself, and he comes to his senses." They didn't know she was just around the corner. But even if they had, Sophia suspected they would have said it anyway. She swallowed it all, the casual cruelty, the dismissive laughter. She absorbed it like she'd been absorbing the world's quiet injuries her entire life. But in the silence of Lorraine's study, she channeled it. She let it fuel her work. She wrote letters to shelters in other cities. She called community leaders. She emailed nonprofits in Chicago, Atlanta, and Oakland, introducing herself not as a leader, but as a student. Every outreach ended the same way. "This initiative is in honor of Lorraine Thorne, and we would love to learn from what you've built." By Friday, she had a list of 10 potential partner cities, 3 grant proposals in progress, and 2 potential board members, both women, both once homeless, both survivors. Yet, inside the gilded cage of the estate, the air grew thick with something toxic. Isabella had not forgotten the interview Marcus had shut down, and she certainly hadn't forgiven being dismissed like an intern. So she began her counter-campaign. It was quiet, insidious, and devastatingly effective. She reached out to former colleagues, dropping hints over brunch and cocktails. "It's a strange situation," she'd say with a concerned sigh. "She's a maid, and suddenly she's running a multi-million-dollar foundation. Sweet girl, but terribly naive. He's letting his emotions cloud his judgment." She anonymously tipped off a prominent Aspen Society columnist, suggesting that Thorne's new philanthropic direction was a romantic indulgence rather than a strategic legacy. Then, the rumors shifted, taking on a darker, more personal tone. "She's manipulating him. She's not who she says she is. There's more to her story. Why did she really stop nursing? She's hiding something." Sophia felt the change before she heard it. Marcus's behavior became more formal again. The coffee stopped appearing on her desk. His questions became more measured, his visits shorter. And then one morning he canceled their weekly planning meeting with a brief, cold text. "Something's come up. We'll regroup soon." Sophia stared at the message, the screen glowing in the dim light of the study. The chill she'd felt years ago, working as a nurse's aide in a hospital where no one listened to her, that same familiar ache of being dismissed began to creep back into her bones. That night, she sat in the estate's courtyard, wrapped in a thin blanket, watching the stars flicker between the dark silhouettes of the pine branches. Her phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. She almost ignored it, but something told her to answer. "Is this Sophia Rossi?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name's Trina Sanders. I used to work at the Broward Women's Center. We got your donation a few weeks ago, and I had to find your number and say thank you." Sophia's throat caught. It wasn't just me." "I know," Trina said gently. "But it came from your heart. We felt it. I just wanted you to know. The girls in the shelter, they hung your note in the main hallway. The one that said, 'You are not invisible.' They read it out loud every morning." Sophia closed her eyes tight. A single hot tear slid down her cheek, then another. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. After they hung up, Sophia sat in the cold for a long time, letting the tears dry on her skin. Then she stood up and walked back inside. She didn't stop at Lorraine's study. She went straight to Marcus's office and knocked. He was alone, leaning over a stack of financial reports. He looked up, surprised when she entered. A tense pause hung between them. "May I speak with you?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. He nodded, motioning to the chair. She didn't sit. "I know what's happening," she said softly. "The rumors, the whispers, the way people are looking at me now." Marcus's face was an unreadable mask of stone. "I've heard some things." "And do you believe them?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like a final, desperate plea. He looked at her then. Really looked. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the weariness in her eyes, the quiet dignity hanging by a thread. "I don't know what to believe right now," he admitted, his voice rough. The words hurt more than she'd expected, but they didn't break her. Sophia nodded once. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said. "You handed me a card, and I used it the only way I knew how. You gave me a legacy to protect, and I've tried to honor it. But I am not going to compete for your approval or play political games with someone who wears ambition like perfume." Marcus flinched just slightly at her description of Isabella. "If you think I'm here to manipulate you," she added, her voice gaining a steely resolve, "then take it all back. The key, the plans, the dream, it's all yours." He was silent, but she wasn't finished. I didn't come here to be trusted. I came here to clean floors. Everything else, you gave me that. If it makes you uncomfortable now, then maybe this legacy was never mine to carry." She turned to leave. "Sophia," Marcus said, his voice stopping her. Her back was still to him. "I don't doubt your heart," he said, his voice raw with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. "I doubt myself. The last time I believed in someone this much, I buried her 3 years later." Sophia turned slowly. The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and bleeding. "And I'm terrified," he continued, his voice cracking slightly, "that if I believe in you, I'll lose that too." The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't sharp. It felt open, like a wound finally exposed to the air. Sophia stepped closer to his desk. "Then don't believe in me," she said gently. "Believe in the work. Believe in what Lorraine started." He met her eyes, and in them, for the first time in weeks, he saw not just pain, but power. Real power. The kind that doesn't ask to be seen, but refuses to be ignored. Sunday morning arrived with a snowfall so soft and quiet, it seemed to hush the entire world. The Thorne estate lay under a thin, perfect layer of white, a fresh canvas, untouched and unspoiled. But inside the walls, old doubts still lingered like shadows refusing to fade. Sophia spent the morning reviewing building permits and non-profit registration forms, her fingers smudged with ink and highlighter. Beside her, Lorraine's journals remained open, pages marked with sticky notes and pencil scribbles. The dream was no longer abstract. It had structure, budget lines, and a draft mission statement. Still, she could feel it. Marcus's hesitation. He had apologized in his own stoic way, but something inside him remained closed, guarded by the ghost of his loss. And Isabella? Isabella had gone quiet. Too quiet. Sophia knew from a lifetime of experience that silence from an enemy didn't mean peace. It meant the storm was merely gathering strength. That afternoon, Sophia was summoned not by Marcus, but by an unfamiliar voice over the house intercom. "Miss Rossi, Mr. Fields would like to speak with you in the East drawing room." "Mr. Fields?" She followed the butler through a long hallway to a room she had never been inside. It was ornate and still, a place meant more for display than for living. A fire crackled in the marble hearth. 2 men in dark, severe suits stood beside a tea cart. One of them, a lean man with a steel-gray beard and the cold, assessing eyes of a corporate executioner, extended a hand. "Miss Rossi, I'm Everett Fields. I handle Mr. Thorne's legal and philanthropic affairs." Sophia shook his hand cautiously. "We're reviewing some updates to Mr. Thorne's estate structure," Fields said, studying her as if she were a line item on a balance sheet. "Your name came up." "My name?" she echoed, surprised. "Yes," Fields continued, his tone flat and professional. "There is talk of establishing a new charitable trust, with you slated for a leadership position." The second man, younger and sharper, chimed in. "We just want to clarify some details for the record. We understand you have no prior non-profit leadership experience, no degree in business administration, no formal certifications of any kind?" "That's correct," Sophia said, her voice tight. "And you were previously employed here as—" "The housekeeper?" the younger man asked, not bothering to hide the flicker of disdain in his expression. "Yes," Sophia said simply. Fields continued, his voice unchanging. "This is highly irregular, Miss Rossi. Not illegal, but unusual. The Thorne Foundation is historically conservative in its appointments. A move like this raises certain governance questions." Sophia's stomach turned. She felt a hot flush of shame and anger rise to her cheeks. "I didn't ask to be appointed. I didn't ask for any of this." Fields gave a slow, deliberate nod. Understood. But if your name remains on these trust documents, it will face intense scrutiny. From the press, from major donors, possibly even from the extended Thorne family, should they choose to challenge it. I'm not trying to be a figurehead, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm trying to build something real. Fields looked at her, not unkindly, but with a professional detachment that was somehow worse. Intentions aren't always enough, Miss Rossi. Perception is a powerful currency. She left the room feeling numb, not angry, just bone-tired, the kind of tired that settled deep in your marrow, the kind she hadn't felt since the night her mother passed away, and every relative had looked at her as if she wasn't strong enough to carry what came next. She returned to Lorraine's study, sat in the old armchair, and pulled a blanket tightly around her shoulders. The wind howled softly through the cracks in the window pane. Then came a knock on the door. It was Marcus. He didn't wait for an invitation, just walked in slowly, holding a folded piece of paper. I should have warned you they were coming, he said quietly. You sent them? She asked, her voice flat. No, but I didn't stop them either. Sophia nodded, her expression unreadable. They're worried about the legacy, Marcus continued, avoiding her gaze. About my judgment, about how the foundation will be perceived by the world. And what about you? She asked, her voice so soft he almost missed it. Are you worried too? He finally sat down across from her. I'm not used to this, he admitted, his voice rough. Letting someone else carry something I care about so deeply. I know you're capable, Sophia, but that part of me, the investor, the skeptic, it still asks questions. I wish it wouldn't. Sophia met his gaze. Then let me give you an answer. She stood up, walked to the desk, and pulled out the thick notebook she'd been filling for weeks. She opened it and laid it on the coffee table in front of him. Pages and pages of plans, budgets, schedules, maps, names of community leaders she had already met with, letters of interest from shelter directors across the state. Marcus took the notebook in his hands, flipping through the pages slowly. His expression shifted from skepticism to surprise, and finally to something approaching awe. You built all of this already? He asked, his voice hushed. Sophia nodded. While people were whispering and questioning me, I was working. He stared at the pages, then up at her. I keep waiting for you to crack, he admitted, his voice full of a strange vulnerability. For you to ask for more than you deserve. To fall into the same traps of ego and greed I've seen 100 other people fall into. Sophia gave a sad, weary smile. I'm not a test, Marcus. I'm not here to teach you a lesson about goodness or to save your soul. I'm just trying to do right by Lorraine, and by myself. He closed the notebook gently. I believe you, he said finally. And the others? She asked. Your lawyers? The board? Let me handle them, he said. She nodded, but deep down she knew something else. This wasn't just about legal advisors anymore. Isabella hadn't shown her hand yet, and Sophia had the sinking feeling that when she did, it wouldn't be subtle, and it wouldn't be a conversation in a drawing room. That evening, as Sophia left the study to prepare for bed, she passed Isabella in the long, shadowed hallway. Isabella paused, tilted her head, and offered a smile that was all teeth. Big day, I hear. Meeting with the powers that be. Sophia didn't reply. Isabella stepped closer, her voice a silky whisper. He may trust you now, but power always snaps back to the familiar, to people who belong. I belong, Sophia said softly, the words feeling true for the first time. Even if it makes you uncomfortable. Isabella's eyes flashed with a cold fire. We'll see about that. As she walked away, Sophia felt something settle in her chest. It wasn't fear, not even defiance. It was clarity, a quiet, unshakable resolve that no threat, No lawyer, no whisper could rattle. She turned back toward the study. She still had work to do. It was well past midnight when Sophia found herself back in Lorraine's study, a single desk lamp casting a warm, lonely light across scattered papers and blueprints. Snow tapped against the window pane, quiet and persistent. The estate had fallen into a deep, slumbering silence, but her thoughts hadn't. She sipped lukewarm coffee from a chipped porcelain cup, the same one Lorraine had used, still etched with faint gold leaf along the rim. The room carried her presence, as if her memory hovered just behind Sophia's shoulder, watching, urging her forward. The foundation plan was nearly complete. The first pilot site in a struggling Denver neighborhood was under review. A legal team had drafted preliminary documents, and a small network of community leaders were ready to support the launch. Sophia should have felt proud, hopeful even. But something was off. Isabella hadn't made a move in days, and that silence carried a terrible weight. Just as Sophia was scribbling a note to call the zoning commission, her phone vibrated across the desk. Unknown number. She hesitated, then picked up. "Sophia Rossi?" a man's voice asked. It was clipped, professional. "Yes, I don't think we've met. My name is Robert Maynard. I'm a reporter with the Denver Chronicle." Her heart sank. "I'm sorry. I'm not doing interviews at this time." "I know, that's not why I'm calling. I wanted to give you a heads up." She froze. "A heads up about what?" "There's a story being shopped around," he said, his voice low. "Someone's feeding details about your past. Nursing records, family history, even some old financial difficulties. It's all personal stuff, but the angle is obvious. You're being painted as unqualified, manipulative, and emotionally unstable." Sophia went cold, the coffee cup suddenly heavy in her hand. Do you know who sent it?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer directly. "Let's just say it's coming from inside the estate, and they have documentation." The line clicked off. She sat motionless, the receiver still pressed to her ear. The fear crept in like ice beneath her skin. It was the old, familiar fear, the kind that wrapped around your ribs and whispered, "They're going to take this from you." They always do. At sunrise, Sophia walked through the frost-covered garden, her steps slow and measured. The estate looked serene, pristine, but she knew better. She had grown up around chaos that wore a pretty face. She found Marcus in the sunroom, already dressed, reading a business journal. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice devoid of its usual softness. He looked up, instantly alert. "There's a story coming," she said flatly. "A hit piece, about me." Marcus's brow furrowed. "Where did you hear this?" "A reporter called me last night. He wouldn't name his source, but we both know who it is. It's someone inside. Someone with access to my employee files." Marcus's jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle jumped. "Isabella." Sophia didn't need to confirm it. "I don't care what she thinks of me," Sophia said, her voice shaking slightly, despite her efforts to control it. "But if this becomes public, if your foundation, Lorraine's foundation, is attached to a scandal, it could ruin everything before it even starts, even if none of it is true." Marcus stood up, pacing like a caged lion. "Let me handle it. I'll call Everett. We'll get ahead of this. Issue a statement, threaten legal action." Sophia shook her head. "That's not enough. People believe what they want to believe. I've seen it. I've lived it. Fighting it with lawyers just makes it look like we have something to hide." "Then what do you propose we do?" he asked, stopping to face her. She took a deep breath. "I want to tell my story, on my terms." Marcus blinked. "To the press?" "To the people," she corrected. "To the community. Let them hear it from me first. Not through twisted headlines, not filtered through Isabella's ambition. If this foundation is supposed to be built on dignity, then I need to walk in mine. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at her, and something in his gaze shifted, the corporate strategist giving way to the man Lorraine used to love, the man who once believed that change was not only possible, but necessary. He nodded slowly. Then we do it right. 2 days later, Sophia sat on a simple folding chair in the community hall of the Aurora Women's Shelter. Around her was a modest crowd, shelter volunteers, local mothers, social workers, and a handful of journalists from small, community-focused outlets. There was no grand press conference, no PR firm, just a room filled with people who lived and worked in the margins. A woman named Deshawn, who ran the shelter, introduced Sophia with nothing but raw sincerity. "Sophia didn't come to us with promises," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "She came with coats, food, and her time. She stayed after hours to fold blankets. She didn't want her name on a wall. She wanted warmth in people's hands. That's who she is." Sophia stood up slowly, holding a single piece of paper, but she didn't read from it. "My name is Sophia Rossi," she said, her voice even but thick with an emotion she refused to hide. "Before I came to the Thorne estate, I was a nurse's aide. Before that, a daughter, a sister, a caretaker. I've made mistakes. I've carried burdens. I've been invisible in rooms filled with noise." She paused, letting the silence settle. "But someone gave me a key, not just to a room, but to a legacy, and I intend to honor it, not with perfection but with truth." A few heads in the audience nodded. Someone clapped softly, then another. She continued, her voice growing stronger. "You may hear stories soon that I'm unqualified, that I've failed in the past, that I'm just a maid who got lucky. Maybe some of that is true. Maybe luck did bring me here. But love built this plan, pain shaped it, and purpose will carry it forward." By the end of her short speech, half the room was standing, applauding. And somewhere near the back, Marcus stood silently against the wall, watching the quiet, formidable power Sophia commanded. He had underestimated her. So had everyone else. That night, Isabella sat in her private suite, watching the local news recap of the speech on her tablet. Her expression was a mask of cold fury. She poured herself a glass of wine and leaned back. A knock came at her door. She didn't answer. The door creaked open anyway. Marcus stepped in. "I saw it," she said flatly, not looking at him. "Very moving. A real tear-jerker." He folded his arms. "You leaked her records, Isabella." "She was a liability," she shot back. "She's the reason Lorraine's legacy still breathes in this place," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Isabella finally turned, her voice sharp with years of resentment. "And what am I, Marcus? What have I been for the past 8 years? Your organizer, your fixer, your shadow." "I never asked you to be my shadow." "No," she said, her voice cracking. "You just never let me be anything more." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You turned this into a game, Isabella. A cruel, petty game. And Sophia didn't play along. That's what really bothers you, isn't it?" She stood, stepping close to him. "She doesn't belong in our world." He stared at her for a long moment. "Then maybe it's time our world changed." He turned to leave. As he reached the door, Isabella's voice came out in a desperate whisper. "She's going to break your heart, Marcus." He paused at the doorway, his back still to her. "No," he said, without turning around. "She's teaching it how to beat again." And then he left her alone in the dark, with only the cold comfort of a war she had already lost. Spring arrived in the mountains like a soft, hesitant exhale, melting the last of the stubborn snow and revealing the tender green shoots beneath. The scent of pine and wet earth replaced the icy air of winter. But for Sophia Rossi, the shift in the weather mirrored something much deeper, a thawing of doubt, of fear, of her own invisibility. 2 weeks had passed since her public address at the Aurora shelter. In that time, something remarkable had happened. Not overnight, but gradually, like dawn overtaking a long, dark night. Donations, small at first, began to pour into a fund for the project she had now named the Hearth Project. Handwritten letters from former shelter residents and strangers arrived at the estate, addressed simply to Sophia Rossi, CEO, the Thorn Foundation, thanking her for her words. Volunteers from 4 different states reached out, asking how they could help. Sophia's name stopped being a whisper of speculation and became a quiet statement of purpose. Inside Lorraine's study, Sophia stood before a large corkboard plastered with pinned notes, printed emails, budget updates, and architectural sketches. At the top, in bold permanent marker, was the project's new name, the Hearth Project, a space to come in from the cold. It had been Lorraine's phrase, one Sophia had found buried in a draft proposal from over a decade ago. It felt right. It was right. That morning, Marcus knocked gently on the study door. She looked up, smiling. "You don't have to knock." "I've learned that with visionaries, it's best not to assume," he said lightly, stepping inside with 2 mugs of black coffee. He handed one to her. "The Denver City Council has approved the permit for the first site. We have 6 months to break ground." Sophia's heart leapt. 6 months? "Which means," he added, his expression serious, "we need to hold a formal unveiling, a public event. Donors, community leaders, maybe a few key journalists." Sophia froze, her hands stilling over the desk. Her brief, terrifying foray into the public eye had been a necessity, not a choice. "I know public attention isn't your favorite part of this," Marcus said, reading her hesitation. "But this project is no longer a blueprint, Sophia. It's real. And it needs a face. It needs a voice. Yours." She inhaled slowly, the scent of coffee and old books filling her lungs. "Okay," she said, her voice firm, "but on one condition." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "No red carpet," she said. "No glitter, no gala. We unveil this project the way it was born. In community." Marcus smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Agreed." The event was held on a cloudy Saturday afternoon in a converted school gymnasium in a low-income neighborhood in downtown Denver. Rows of simple folding chairs were set out under string lights, and food trucks lined the adjacent street, offering free meals to anyone who attended. There were no tuxedos, no velvet ropes, just laughter, real conversations, and a long table covered in photographs and architectural plans for the first shelter. Marcus opened the ceremony with a short, heartfelt speech about Lorraine, her stubborn belief in grassroots change, her unyielding compassion. Then it was Sophia's turn. She stood behind a simple wooden podium, hands clasped, wearing a simple navy dress and a small pin with Lorraine's initials. Her voice was calm, but her words rang out with a powerful conviction. "We are not building a shelter," she said, her gaze sweeping across the diverse crowd. "We are building a home for women who have been turned away, overlooked, broken, and brave. This is not a place of pity. It is a place of dignity." The crowd, a mix of community members and city officials, erupted in applause. Then, from the back of the room, a surprise. An elderly woman stood up, her gray hair tucked beneath a crocheted hat. She held a folded, worn newspaper in her hand. The article about Sophia's speech from 2 weeks earlier. "I was homeless for 12 years, the woman said, her voice shaky but clear enough to carry through the gym. "No one ever said my name in public like that. You made me feel seen." Sophia's eyes welled with tears. She stepped down from the podium, walked through the crowd to the woman, and embraced her. It was a moment of raw, unscripted humanity that no amount of money or PR could ever manufacture. Cameras clicked, not for drama, but for truth. Isabella Vance watched from the far side of the gymnasium, a half-empty cup of watery punch in her hand. She had come alone, uninvited, unacknowledged. Her tailored coat and expensive shoes looked alien in this setting. She watched as Sophia received hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt thanks from strangers. A young intern from the city's housing department passed by and smiled politely at Isabella. "Didn't realize Miss Rossi was such a force," he said conversationally. Isabella said nothing. She simply stared ahead, her face a mask of cold comprehension, as if she were trying to decipher how the woman she had dismissed, belittled, and systematically undermined had become someone who could shift the very ground beneath her feet. Later that evening, back at the estate, Sophia sat on the back patio, watching the sun slip behind the mountains. The sky was stained in shades of violet and gold, and the air smelled of pine and renewal. Jonathan joined her, holding a small velvet box in his hand. She turned to him, her eyebrows raised. "Before you panic," he said quickly, "it's not a ring." She laughed, the sound light and easy. He opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of worn silk, was a single brass key, aged and polished smooth by time. "This," he said, his voice low, "was Lorraine's key to her first shelter, the one she started in Chicago. She kept it on her desk until the day she died." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. "I want you to have it," he said. "Marcus, I can't." "I'm not giving you this because of pity or even gratitude," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm giving it to you because she would have. Because you're not just continuing her work. You've made it yours. You've done something I couldn't." Sophia took the key gently from the box, its weight cool and solid in her palm. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "You could have done this without me." "No," he said, his voice firm. "I couldn't have done it right without you." They sat in a comfortable silence, letting the mountains hold their stillness. After a moment, Sophia whispered, "Do you ever miss her?" "Every day," he answered without hesitation. "What do you think she'd say about all this?" He smiled faintly. "She'd tell me I took too damn long to open the door." They both laughed, a soft, genuine sound, full of a shared, unspoken warmth. And just like that, the quiet between them wasn't silence anymore. It was understanding. Sophia held the key a little tighter, her fingers brushing over the worn edges. It didn't matter where she had started, what whispers had followed her. This was where she belonged now.